start a new part of the show, which is a World War I cocktail recipe. So Don, I'm gonna make you the host so that you can get the full screen.
Okay. Oh, are we starting with the cocktail?
Yeah, let's start with a cocktail. Are you
Okay,
ready?
great. Very good. Yeah, Kevin, you just run it however you want. I'm going to move this back a little bit. And could you tilt that down a little bit?
Yeah.
Just to see the everything. That's good. All right, great. I wish I had more light. Oh well. Can everybody see me?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, I'm more of an armchair expert, hobbyist and bartender, but I do know the experts personally, and if I have questions, I can email them and they get back to me. So that's a nice thing. One of the things we're going to be doing today, pretty much the thing we're going to be doing today, is a French 75. I'm getting an echo. Is everybody okay? Okay. I heard somebody was giving me feedback. I couldn't tell. So what I'm drinking right now is actually a Tom Collins. So we're going to tie that into fives and why that's important.
1 second.
And it's basically gin, lemon juice, sugar, ice, and seltzer water. That's what a Tom Collins is. The one I'm having is the 1800 style, which is made with a shine at the ceiling, not directly, but yeah, which is made with an Old Tom gin, which is a slightly sweeter gin. Yeah, 704, just shoot it straight up, so I don't, because it's lighting. That's better. Yeah. Okay. Now it's better. Now I can see. So, sorry, Rachel's here and she's helping me out. So, French 75, as you guys probably all know, it was the 75 millimeter gun, which was, there were thousands of them produced by the French. They were used by the French and the AEF. So they were known by the French as the 75, which of course I don't understand how you go from 68, 69, 60, 10, 60, 11, 60, 12, but that's French. So that means 60 and 15, 75. The US troops, of course, called it French 75 gun. Now, if you go and order a French 75, you're going to get it in a modern champagne flute, and it's going to be similar to this. It's going to have gin, London dry gin. I'm going to be using Dorothy Parker gin for ours later, and lemon juice and simple syrup or some sweetener, and then it's topped with champagne in a champagne flute. That's the modern way of doing it. However, and also there are variations with cognac. Like if you go to New Orleans and go to Arnaud's, they serve theirs with cognac and they say that was the original way. Do we really know? If you're not confused already, I'm going to confuse you a lot more. Because if you had it back in 1927 after the war, this book, it's called, let me take the jacket off. Here's How from 1927 by Judge Jr. has a recipe for, it's the first recipe for the French 75. It's in this book. And it says, this drink is really what won the war for the Allies. 2 jiggers of Gordon water, Gordon's gin, 1 part lemon juice, a spoonful of powdered sugar, cracked ice, fill up the rest of a tall glass with champagne. If you, now here's the thing, it has in parentheses. If you use club soda instead of champagne, you have a Tom Collins. So in 1927, if you went to a bar and ordered a French 75, you would have got something that looked like this, not in a champagne flute. That's the original French 75, where it would have been seltzer soda water instead of champagne and not in a champagne flute. So if you want to go to a bar today and order French 75, you can get it the modern way. If you want to be historically accurate, and actually I think this is a nicer drink with the ice, it's delicious. So this was 1927, and it is the first time that French 75 appeared in a recipe book. Now that's kind of late, you know, it's roughly a decade after the war. So is it really accurate to being a World War I cocktail? Well, we've got this book, Cocktails and How to Mix Them. This was published in 1922, and it has a recipe for the 75 cocktail. I don't know if you can see it there, Blueberry, but it is: fill the shaker half full of broken ice and add 2 dashes of grenadine, 1 teaspoonful of lemon juice, 1/8 gill of Calvados. Calvados is a French apple brandy, and 2/6 gill of dried gin. Shake well and strain into the cocktail glass. It says this cocktail was very well appreciated in Paris during the war, World War I. It has been called after the famous light French field gun and was introduced by Henry of Henry's bar fame in Paris. So there we do have a connection directly to the field gun. It says Henry of Henry's bar fame in Paris. Can't find any Henry. However, there was Harry McElhone of Harry's bar in Paris. It was Harry's New York bar. So I've got some info on him. He'd been a bartender at Ciro's in London after World War I. From what research I've done, he had actually fought for the British. But in 1921, he was working at Ciro's. Then in 1923, he bought the New York bar in Paris. It was a bar that had been, the owner had bought a bar in New York and shipped the whole thing to Paris. And Harry bought it from him, renaming it Harry's New York Bar. Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Gertrude Stein, George Gershwin, they were all hanging out there. And Harry's descendants actually still run it. The McElhones still have it. And here's where it gets muddy, is different sources say, like this book says, that Harry invented the French 75 either in 1915 or 1921. The White Lady in 1919, which would have been when he was at Ciro's. The Bloody Mary in 1919, either at Ciro's or in 1921 when he was at Harry's. He also invented the sidecar in the 30s. So we don't know how much is actually accurate, how much Harry's descendants are just, adding to his legend. And when you have a book that's published in 1922, you don't know if the recipe came from 1922 or they'd been doing it for 10 years. So when you have Harry's recipe, which I'm going to go into in just a second, we don't really know if he developed it during World War I. Chances are he wasn't bartending there. He was actually in the service. Did he develop it right afterwards in honor of the French gun? Or did he invent his, which is Calvados, gin, absinthe, and grenadine? The difference is that he has absinthe, where the other cocktail book, which was Robert's, had lemon juice. So what happened? Did he invent it and then change the recipe when he went to France? Did Robert pick up the recipe and drop the absinthe and add the lemon juice? We don't know. Either way, though, this is a post-World War I cocktail. That first reference of it is in 1922. So what would they have been definitely drinking in World War I? As far as I can find, according to Difford's Guide, they have a Washington Post article, recipe, whatever, from 1915. And it has the 65 cocktail, which is what the French called their gun. So this is a recipe from 1915 that people would have been drinking. And I'm gonna make my version here now. It's based on kind of like a sidecar, which is equal proportions, which I find is a little too much. It's with lemon juice. So we are going to have a 1/4 ounce of lemon juice. Show you how to do everything properly. I like to strain my lemon juice so you don't actually get any seeds in there. Add a little bit more. Very good. So then, 1/4 ounce of lemon juice. Next, we've got a 1/2 ounce of grenadine. Grenadine is really interesting if you want to be accurate. Now, I've got this, and you might wonder, why is it in a pomegranate juice bottle? The reason is, if you don't know what grenadine is pomegranate syrup. It is not what most people think of grenadine, which is an artificially flavored corn syrup, cherry-ish flavor, red dye concoction. Originally, it is pomegranate syrup made with equal parts pomegranate and sugar. You can make it at home. That's what I did, and that's why I just put it back in the bottle. You make it with 2 cups of pomegranate juice, 2 cups of sugar, 2 ounces of pomegranate molasses, if you have, and then a couple dashes of orange flower water. Let it simmer and then bottle it. If you want it to last for a really long time, you add a little bit of vodka, but that is pomegranate syrup. And if you don't know, Grenada is French for pomegranate, which is why they called grenades. So, next one. 1 ounce bonded applejack. So the other recipe's out of Calvados, which is a French brandy. The earlier recipe says applejack, and I've got this from New Jersey, Laird's straight apple brandy. So we got that in there. And then lastly, 1 ounce of dry gin. By the way, if you like the pomegranate syrup, it makes a fantastic homemade Shirley Temple. If you juice some lemons and limes and add some of the grenadine, homemade grenadine and seltzer, that's basically a Shirley Temple. I'm using Dorothy Parker Gin, New York Distilling Company, fantastic place. Our friend Alan has that, and they're making a great hand sanitizer right now. So here, I'll put that back there where you can see the ingredients. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I'm gonna go get some ice. Okay. Just shake it. Got my glass here. There we go. And if you want to be fancy, you can always just put a twist on it. Just press the oils over that.
Nice.
And that is a Soissons Cans, an original French 75. So, cheers. That's pretty much it. Kevin, you said 10 minutes. I think I went a little bit over, but there you go. That's your French 75s, your Tom Collins if you want, and an original French 75. And we can put the recipes online if you like.
Yeah, let's do that. Someone needs to mute themselves. Someone has.
Any questions too?
The gin's available everywhere. If you go to gallery view at the top right, you can see everybody. Someone might have 2 devices open or something. It's kind of we're getting like some feedback from someone's phone.
Yeah, that's what I was hearing.
The trench gremlin.
Did somebody have 2 devices open at the same time? Does someone dial into the phone call and the video chat? Okay, it's off now. Jared, I had a question about the French 75 field gun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. I could share a screen and show a couple different photos so people have an idea what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Here.
Nice.
All right, I'm going to make you the host, and then we're going to bring on our other topic expert. Oh my God, it is.
Can people see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Look at this.
Just need to max the screen and we're good.
Okay, we can do that. So we go to F5. Oh shit! It's the first time I've actually done it off this, so I'm not sure the best way to show it to the entire screen.
That looks good. That's fine.
Okay. All right. So hey, what we're looking here is actually the French 75. It's a pretty amazing piece of technology. This is one of the first cannons in the world that has like an auto recoil device. That's kind of what that upper right-hand diagram is explaining right there. So pretty much as it fires it, it automatically recocks itself. But the amazing part about this cannon is it doesn't move out of position. So, you know, you don't have to resight the gun or bring a crew up to try to get to put it back on a target. So you fire it, load another shell, you can fire it at the same target with minimal adjustment. So this is kind of, it became a huge state secret. The French government considered this one of their military secrets, spent a lot of time, a lot of the pre-war drama about, if anybody's heard of the Dreyfus affair, this is one of those things that he was apparently accused of selling these sort of secrets to the German government. And it was a great affair because they're blaming a French Jewish officer over turning over state secrets. So, but anyway, this kind of explains kind of what the system is. And the other cool part about this is that it becomes pretty much a popular cultural icon in the French military. So as you can see right here, this is just an example of some of the picture postcards. You had everything from Easter cards to Christmas cards, Valentine's Day cards, where they would shove the 75 in the middle of the card. I mean, the French artillery, you know, it goes back to the time of Napoleon. Napoleon was an artillery officer, so they kind of always took pride in that. And this was how they were going to beat the Germans. The problem is they spent all their money on the French 75 and didn't really invest in high velocity, long range howitzers. And so these fire at a very flat trajectory, so you can actually range about 9,000 meters. So, you know, almost, see, it comes out to like 5.3 miles. But the problem is you can't elevate it. And that's one of the problems you run into. It's just this very flat elevation. The other problem is if you have attacking infantry underneath that, because it's such flat elevation, it's literally the rounds are flying just over the heads of the infantry. And so that's one of the problems you have is a lot of times the rounds could go short. And finally, one of the most famous men in the AAF to use this piece was, and can anybody identify this guy?
That's Kevin, isn't it?
Truman.
Yes, baby.
Yeah. All right, give the man a cigar. Yeah, that's Harry Truman right there in the 35th Division. Right there, I believe is a captain. And he was a battery commander in the 35th. And if you find some of his, I couldn't pull up the account, but he accounts of firing down to the last minute on November 11th. Was his battery blazing at the Germans and a 75 is shooting off. So he's probably one of the most famous artillery men in the AAF to use this piece. And with that, that's all I got.
Thank you, Jared. Jared's going to be our guest next week. We're going to talk a lot about the French in World War I, and I'm really looking forward to that.
Cool.
Anybody have any questions about the French 75, the drink or the weapon?
Can we go back to those Valentine cards? Like start that as a tradition, just, you know, going back to sending those out?
Yeah, if anybody wants to get into collecting, something that's really cheap and easy to collect from across the world are these sort of picture postcards. I know some of you guys do it already, but the French really went hardcore with, you even find high-end sexual innuendo postcards with the French because they didn't have the same sort of morality the other allies did. So there's also, I couldn't find it. I was looking for one. There's some semi-nude women hanging off these cannons you can find out there as well.
That's a future topic. I love it.
Yeah. Oh, like Kevin said, if anybody does have any questions about the cocktails or other cocktails or suggestions for future cocktail things, I know I ran through that fast because I wanted to keep it moving. But yeah, please feel free to ask me or email me.
Cool. So I want to bring on Gabby. Now, Gabby's been reenacting for 5 years. The first time I ever heard about Gabby was, I think, through Eddie. Eddie Chow was going to march in the parade, and he didn't happen. And he said, I'm going to borrow a Springfield from Gabby from Pennsylvania. So first of all, Gabby, how many weapons did you bring into this marriage? That's the first thing I want to know. How many guns do you own?
I think I brought about at least 5 or 6, because I inherited a lot of weapons from my grandparents before we got married. I think I account for at least 2, if not 3 of the shotguns we have.
And you have an 03.
Yeah.
And you started reenacting 5 years ago. What got you into it?
Well, I've always been interested in World War I, but since I didn't know anyone in the World War I reenacting community, I heard about Newville from some folks, but I didn't know anyone to know how to get connected. So I mainly started out with World War II reenacting and met friends through there. And then when Chris and I met, he and I ended up getting involved in the World War I living history community. That was in about 2017. We've been involved with World War I.
And I'm going to make you the host now because we're going to start talking about everyone's favorite subject, the Marine Corps.
Yay.
All right, so I'm making Gabby the host. Okay. You got that?
Okay, this is just a preface. All the information that I'll be sharing today comes from the Marine History Division from their museum. It was compiled into a guide by Marine Captain, oops, sorry, it's already moving through my slideshow. Sorry about that. That keeps it. Nope. Sorry about that. No, that unpause it. So anyways, this all comes from the marines.mil website, and I will share, all this is available in an online PDF. It's a complete comprehensive guide to women Marines in World War I at the Marine Corps put together. So I'm sure many of you have seen both of these posters, both the poster on the left and the poster on the right, of the woman Marine who is in the male dress uniform with the cartridge belt and bayonet. And there's also the similar one with the woman in the sailor's uniform that says, "Gee, I wish I were a man, I would join the Navy." But what a lot of you may not know is that in 1918, you didn't have to wish that you were a man to join the naval services. The Navy itself, if you were tuning in on the Canteen Night about 2 weeks ago, Laura Adey had a wonderful presentation about female yeomen in World War I and their involvement, because the Navy recruited female yeomen to help free up male yeomen in admin tasks so that there could be as many sailors on ships and serving in the fight in World War I. And the Marine Corps in 1918, the war was at an all-time high, and they needed to free up as many men as they could to get to the front. So that is what brought them to want to hire the women Marines. General Barnett of the Marine Corps wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Navy, Josephus Daniels, on August 8, 1918, requesting authority to enroll women in the Marine Corps Reserve for clerical duty at Headquarters Marine Corps and at other Marine offices in the United States where their services may be utilized to replace men who may be qualified for active field service. On a letter dated for that same day, Secretary Daniels gave his official approval. Overnight, the word was spread around newspapers, and on August 13th, thousands of women flooded the recruiting stations all over the United States to enlist in the Corps. The very first was a Mrs. Opha May Johnson, who we see over here. She then worked as a civil service employee. I know if you look online, you'll see lots of photos of women Marines in uniform that are erroneously labeled as Opha May. But the photo that we have over here is the only wartime photo that we have of her. And then you can see these are all the applicants who have flooded into a New York recruiting office to join the Corps. Ofame was subsequently assigned to be a clerk in the Quartermaster General's office, and by the time the war was over, she held the rank of sergeant, which in World War I, sergeant was the highest rank that a woman Marine could hold, as there were no commissioned officer positions for them like there was in World War II. All women who were selected from the pool of enrollees were enlisted as privates in the Marine Reserve for a period of a 4-year period of enlistment, even though ultimately many of them didn't go on to serve for a full 4 years, just like the female yeomen in the Navy, because their service wasn't needed at all after the war, so they were placed on inactive service for the duration of those remaining 4 years that they had. So each of the applicants who went to enroll needed to furnish at least 3 letters of recommendation and undergo a physical test to show how fit that she was. And she also had a stenography test, a shorthand dictation test, and a typing test, all of which were timed for speed and accuracy. And the Marine Corps prided itself on having, you had to be the best of the best when it came to clerical and admin duties in order to be accepted. And if they were accepted, well, they would go home and they would wait for orders to arrive. And once orders would arrive, they would immediately depart from Washington or any recruiting office that they would have been required to go to. Since in 1918, even the faintest concept of women being expected to go to any sort of basic training was not in play. And even if it was, by the time August 1918 was around, the Marine Corps needed the women in the offices immediately. So they were sent directly to work. General McLemore actually nicknamed the women Marines in DC his 100% girls because of the extremely high demands for speed and accuracy in order to pass their tests. One girl, a 17-year-old Miss Elizabeth Shoemaker of New York City, was determined to become a Marine despite failing the test on the first try. She returned the following day to the same recruiting office to try again, even though it wasn't technically allowed. And she was stopped by a colonel who pointed out, "Weren't you here yesterday?" To which she said, "Yes, I was." He got up from his desk, shook her hand, and said, "Now that's the spirit that will lift the Germans. I'll allow you to take the test again." She passed the second time around with flying colors and became a Marine clerk in DC. You'd be surprised at how patriotic some of these women's motivation was, as many other women enrollees tried just as hard as Private Shoemaker to enter the Marine Corps, as it was considered an elite branch of service. And some of the women were motivated because they'd either lost their Marine husband or sweetheart in France, or that their husbands or sweethearts were fighting in France currently. They were willing and ready to do their part to help in this fight with the Marine Corps. A private, Martha Wilichinsky, writing to her sweetheart in France, wrote, "I hear some people are giving us nicknames. Isn't it funny how when a girl becomes a regular fellow, many people try to queer it up by giving her a different name than what it is? Well, Bill, some people just go around taking the joy out of life. Anybody that calls me anything but Marine is going to hear from me. Marine is more than good enough for me." The most popular term that was widely used by the public was marinette, but this was frowned upon by the Corps, which discouraged its use and often posted notices in offices to reinforce that the female reservists were not to be called marinettes. Like their sister service, the yeomanry, they were not officially called anything different from their male counterparts, with the exception that they had the designated F in parentheses in front of their title as Marine, or in the case of the Navy, yeoman. Many of their working days were up to 10 hours or more, 6 days a week, every week, with their KP duty being assigned as cleaning and sweeping the offices, washing windows, cleaning up bathrooms. And for any of the women Marines that were stationed in DC, like most of them were, they had to be drilled every morning at 0700 at the ellipse behind the White House. And we have here a photo of them in the middle of winter drill. Some of the women did find the drill to be trying at times. They didn't have any weapons that they needed to carry, but they were still expected to march in the drills. and many of them felt that they were being drilled just as hard as their male counterparts, because the drill instructors who were assigned to drill them were so incensed that they were assigned to drill women that they drove the Winter Marines just as hard as they would have males. One Private Florence Dirtler, who was in the pivot of her platoon, related to how she got her foot caught in the soggy dirt one morning behind the White House and was unable to turn. "I got KP for that," she said. "I sure must have looked funny with my body going one direction and my leg caught in the other." When they weren't working, drilling, or on KP, or running messages around in DC headquarters, one Marine described DC as a dancing town with lots of lovely rooftops that on their evenings off or on Sunday, which was the main day that they had off, they would go dancing. And often these women were so popular, I don't know whether it was because of the fact that they were Marines or the fact that their uniform looked so sharp, they would often double book on dates in DC on their nights off. And in one instance, a Private Johansson actually had 7 men booked for a date all at once, and took her complaint to her landlady saying, "I don't know what I'm gonna do with all of these guys that asked me out." So they ended up all being invited over to our boarding house and had dinner there. So at least that sticky situation got resolved. For the housing situation of the reservists, which this actually has to do with the Spanish flu and how it was very difficult to navigate DC when it was being ravaged by a virus, as I'm sure it is in Washington, DC right now, like it is all over America. But the Winter Marines weren't given official housing by the Marine Corps like the men were, because obviously the Marines weren't prepared to make separate female housing because they needed them to get to work right away. So they were given a stipend every month of $83.40 to look for lodging. And many of them, because of the housing shortage due to the war and also because of the Spanish flu that was going on in 1918, they had a very difficult time trying to find lodgings together to try to save money and stick together. So they were forced to either rent single rooms, or if you were lucky, you could find a boarding house that would provide you with food 6 days a week. You would just have to provide for yourself on Sunday. But what one of them said is that they had to eat out every single day if you were stuck in just a single rented room. And just like today, most of the restaurants were closed in DC. And the concept of, I guess, takeout food really wasn't much of a thing then. So they would just try and limit how many people could go into the restaurant. And one complained, she said, "We would have to go in and stand third behind someone and wait while 2 ahead of us actually sat down and eat. Then when they left, there would be room for us to come in and sit down and eat." And they had to do that pretty much every day if you weren't lucky enough to have a boarding house. But luckily for 70 of the Winter Marines, a lady by the name of Mrs. John D. Rockefeller was alerted to the housing situation that these women were going through. And through her efforts, because Mrs. Rockefeller was on the War Council at the time, she made sure that they were quartered in the brand new and as of yet not opened Georgetown Prep School in Rockville, Maryland. And she had a full-time cook who used to manage a tea room that would serve them. One of the women who was grateful for it commented, "It was a beautiful place with private rooms and excellent food prepared daily by a former tea room manager." And this is a Miss Sergeant Powers, who was among those lucky 70. Now, moving on to uniforms. The Marines had a very sharp look, and not to discount any of the other services that had women in them, but I'm biased into thinking that the female Marine uniform, especially the wool winter uniform, is just, it's so sharp. Second only to the male dress blues, but they were authorized to wear a khaki summer uniform, and a forest green wool winter uniform. And you normally see photos like in this picture of the wool winter uniform. There's only a couple photos that exist of the khaki summer uniform. They were issued, I believe they had to buy these items themselves, but I will have to look into that further. But it was the wool jacket for winter and or the khaki jacket for summer. They always had to have their necktie, their shirt, and they were authorized to wear a garrison cap with an EGA on it. Or if it was going to rain or if it was going to snow in the winter, they could wear the campaign hat with an EGA on it. And the Winter Marines described the campaign hat as being an excellent umbrella that kept the rain off of their hair. And they also had forest green winter overcoats for when it was cold out and they'd be drilling or walking to and from the office. They weren't allowed to have handbags, and since they couldn't carry handbags, they found it a little bit tricky to figure out where to place handkerchiefs or any other little necessities. So they could usually fit about one handkerchief in their pockets, because if they overstuffed their pockets, they would be wrinkly and unseemly, and the Marine Corps didn't like that. The Navy yeomen had very lax regulations compared to the Marines, because the Winter Marines were not even allowed to so much as loosen their necktie or turn their collar down, even on a hot Washington summer day, whereas the Navy yeomen, at least at first, from what I understand, were allowed to have lace collars and jewelry. That caused some amount of grumbling for the Marines, but most of them did a pretty good job of following the regulations, except for one in particular. And that was the violation that was they would wear the Sam Brown belt, as you can see over here on the picture on the left. One woman, hold on. Most of them wore the Sam Brown belt, even though it was against regulation, because it made their uniform look really good. One Sergeant Johansson actually said it made the uniform look so particularly stunning. So most of them took the liberty to wear it whenever they felt they could get away with it, whether that was on leave, but especially at rallies and parades. On one occasion, one Marine wore her belt to work, was scolded severely by the major that she worked for, and he forbade it from her ever wearing it again. But a couple months later, there was a big victory parade led by Pershing in Washington, and all Marines, male and female, were expected to attend it. And an order went out the day before the parade that all male Marine officers were required to wear the Sam Brown belt, and within hours, all Washington stores were completely sold out. And the same major who had scolded the Marine under him for wearing the Sam Brown belt ended up asking for her help to borrow her Sam Brown belt and sent her home in an official car to get it an hour before the parade happened. After the war, Secretary Daniels was asked about the uniforms of the Winter Marines, and he had this to say: "The uniforms of the Marines, F, were natty and beautiful, worn with pride, and suited to the duty that they were assigned. As the designer of women's uniforms, the Navy Department scored a distinct success, for the style of these uniforms was copied by women all over the country after the war. These women had to work hard to prove themselves and get promotions, given for time of work, time in service, and most importantly, work well done and conduct becoming a woman. Many of these women Marines were enthusiastic to work hard and achieve over and above what they were asked to do. And this was especially true in the case of one Private Elizabeth Bertram, who worked in the recruiting office of her hometown of Denver, Colorado. And that involved in her taking so much pride in her job that when it was time for the Denver male Marines to qualify on the rifle range, she was determined not to be left out, which posed a bit of an odd problem for Major Charles Guggenheim of the Denver recruiting station. She said, "I grew up in a small town. In my younger days, I had done hunting and lots of target practice, and I considered myself an above average shot. And when I learned that qualifying on the rifle range meant extra dollars added to my paycheck, I asked for permission to try out. The major gave me an unequivocal no. The official firing range was over 100 miles away on the western slope of the Rocky Mountains. And there was no way that the major was just going to send a female on a jaunt that far just to say she knows how to handle a gun. So Major Guggenheim turned to Corporal Jones, who worked in our office. She thinks she can shoot, he said. Day after tomorrow, take her to the Denver police station range just outside city limits and make the necessary arrangements for a one-person regulation full course tryout. The day after tomorrow turned out to be a cold, windy, overcast day with squalls of icy rain, but orders were orders. So Corporal Jones and I, equipped with blank target sheets, ammunition, and an Enfield Army rifle, went to the designated place. The rifle range was a vast expanse of clayish mud with a few outcroppings of rock. There were several policemen waiting under shelter to see what was going on. The rifle was too long in the stock to hold firm pressure against my shoulder, and there were suppressed snickers from the watching policemen. With almost 20/20 vision, I did all right in the standing positions and thought I made a bullseye. I did fairly well in kneeling and sitting and managed a few good shots prone, but every time I tried rapid fire, the result was disaster. But I stuck it out for the full course, and by the time it was done, my shoulder was pounded almost to jelly. We returned to the office sopping wet. The next day, I returned spick and span, but with the grandfather of all bruises spreading over my shoulder. The major spread out my target sheets on his desk with every bullet hole carefully evaluated. You seem to be unofficially qualified, the major acknowledged. You will be included in the next class to go to the official range. He then got up from his desk and approached me saying, in the meantime, you may wear this, and pinned his own engraved marksmanship medal on my blouse. I intended to execute a proper salute, but when I tried to raise my right arm, I involuntarily yelled, ouch, and instead ran to my desk in a fit of agony and shame. Major Guggenheim, the strict disciplinarian and he of the hair-trigger temper, saved the day with a burst of hearty laughter. Unfortunately, but for a good reason, Private Bertram never got the chance to go to the official rifle range. Because not too much later, on November 11th, 1918, the war ended and Private Bertram and all the rest of the women reservists were placed on inactive duty. Ultimately, while the use of the Women Marines were used publicly as a recruitment tool, whether in their daily drills at the White House or in putting up recruiting posters in New York City or riding parade floats in Philadelphia, the Women Marines were generally recognized and treated protectively by their male counterparts rather than disrespected overall. Of course, there were naysayers who felt that the Corps had stepped down by recruiting women, but a PFC Edith Messiah said, the men did not look down on or frown on us. Actually, they were glad to have us. We were given a job to do and we did it. We were definitely not considered decorative rather than practical, and we were generally treated like professionals. On February 3rd, 1919, the Women Marines received a special honor when Major General Barnett personally reviewed them in parade on the ellipse behind the White House. And Eugene J. Corr, a noted director of the International Film Corporation, was on hand to take motion pictures of this unique moment in military annals. And he was apparently so inspired by what he said was the Women Marines' snappy appearance that he entitled his feature film story, No Wonder the Kaiser Quit. Does anybody have any questions?
No, that's cool. No, we're all me.
Hang on a second.
Yep, it's cool.
That was really great, Gabby.
Gabby, I have a question.
Okay.
So similar to the other women, were these women recognized as actual veterans after the war? Did they get a pension? Could they apply for one?
That I don't know, but I know at least there was at least a significant number of them who, after World War I, they returned to active service in World War II. A lot of them serving in officer commission, so then they got recognized as veterans, but I'm not yet sure if they received actual recognition status in the time before that.
Gabby, do you know how many women served in World War I for the Marines?
I don't recall the actual number. I was planning on writing that down before I started my presentation, but I believe it was a pretty small number.
That's fine. I just wanted to see overall if it was as many as the Navy had.
I don't believe it was as many as the Navy.
You got a question in the comment section.
I'd be eager to hear about them too.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
What age could they join? They could join at age 18, though, like in the case of the one private shoemaker who tried to join up in New York City and succeeded. She was only 17, but she lied about her age and was able to pass for 18.
I have a question. In the interwar years, were there women Marines, like once World War I was done, were there women Marines up until in between World War I and World War II?
No, I don't believe so.
Thank you.
No, they were, I'm pretty sure they were disbanded, and it was sort of like a shock all over again, which actually in World War II, the story goes that, it was Archibald Henderson, well, it was his portrait. Archibald Henderson's portrait fell off the wall when another, I think it was a general or the commandant said that they had to bring women Marines back again in World War II.
Oh, my word.
Thank you.
That was great. I'm open to hear if anybody else wants to do any presentations in the coming weeks while we are still on lockdown. So if anybody has any ideas, just shoot me a message. That was really great, Gabby and Don. Jared is going to be up next week to talk about some cool French stuff. Anybody else has any other suggestions or want to invite people? That'd be really nice to do this while there's no reenacting going on. It looks like our first event might be the one in July in Pennsylvania, the air show. If you're going by what they're saying about everything being shut down in May and June. So that might be it.
Did they move it?
Anybody else have anything they want to throw out there? We have some new people. I see Pavel is on and Stephanie. Good to see you guys.
Hello.
Chris, what's the drink of the day?
I think he's talking to you.
What?
No, the other Chris, Brooklyn Chris.
Oh.
It's
We're
me.
always going back and forth with the IPA of the day or something like that. Of course. Oh my God. Ugh.
Yeah,
Hey, desperate times call for desperate measures.
it's out of a tiki cup. My oh, woe is me, Newville was canceled package here. So I got a really cool postcard of the 107th, 27th Division Memorial right on Central Park.
Cool.
A not out of the shrink wrap 1917 DVD. So the wife is being subjected tonight, but it's good to see everybody.
Yeah. Has anybody bought any stuff with your stimulus checks?
Oh,
Nope.
yeah.
You know it's going to reenacting.
Thanks to Mario Acosta, got a sweet service cap for the Marine Corps.
Cool.
Right on.
Hey, Kevin.
Anybody else get anything new?
Laura.
I managed to pick up.
What is that? I can't see it so well.
Laura's going to grab a Navy.
I'm hearing a lot of static.
Brian, can you hold it up again?
Here we go. This is a veterinary saddlebag. Oh my gosh, what am I hearing? See that?
Oh, that's so cool.
It opens up. It's not complete. I'm going to have to do some restoration on it. but it opens up. There's supposed to be a pocket up at the top here that will hold instruments or bottles of medicine and stuff.
That was veterinary
Yeah.
for when we had the foot and mouth outbreak.
Well, for earlier, this is actually a German model, but the American one, originally they had imported some of these from Germany in the pre-war years, and then eventually made some of their own that were based on the same model. This is what you see pictured in the quartermaster catalog or manual.
Very cool.
But that was my most prized possession lately.
Brian, do you have the veterinary tools too? Do you have the veterinary set
Yes,
during operations?
I put together a veterinary kit for the World War I period. I've taken it to a few events.
I'd be interested to see that. I know John Alani has one too.
Yeah.
It just looks so different from a regular surgeon's kit. All the different tools that you probably know what they are, and it's just, they look like these giant things.
Yeah. Yeah, there are some tools that are unique to the veterinary kit that you don't see in the medical stuff. But
yeah, I'd be very interested in more veterinary stuff. I think we all are animal lovers. It'd be very nice. That's so cool. Well,
So Laura found something. Laura's found something pretty cool too. She's got an original Yeoman F Navy Yard badge from the New York Navy Yard.
Oh, wow.
Hey, I didn't see this. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's awesome. So this is the only one like this I've ever seen for a Yeoman F. I was very excited. Luke put me onto the eBay listing and I immediately put in an offer. So yay, I was very excited.
That's really cool. That's really cool. And Tom, what do you have, Tom? What was that?
It's a 1918 folding Corona typewriter. Yeah.
Yay, paperwork. Woo!
Yep, you know it.
That's really cool. I think next week we shall show our stuff, like Antiques Roadshow. Next week I bring one cool thing.
Or drinking kit.
Yes. Yeah, this was really fun. It's really great to see everybody.
Great job, Gab and gentleman with the cocktails. Sorry, I'm a little further down the line with my comment. Don, thank you, Don.
Thanks.